On a quiet street in the English village of Great Denham, neighbours believed they knew the family living behind one particular front door. It was a peaceful community where children played outside, families greeted one another, and little ever disturbed the calm. Nothing suggested that one house would soon become the centre of one of Britain's most shocking murder investigations. For days, nobody had seen 42-year-old Nothabo Zandile Chuma or her two daughters. 15-year-old Natalie had stopped appearing, and 5-year-old Nala was nowhere to be seen. Friends and neighbours began to worry. Messages went unanswered. Curtains remained closed. The family seemed to have disappeared without explanation. Concern eventually grew serious enough for police to carry out a welfare check at the family's home. Officers forced their way inside, expecting perhaps to find someone ill or in need of help. Instead, they discovered a scene that would immediately launch a triple murder investigation. Inside the house were the bodies of Nothabo and her two daughters. 3 lives had ended inside what should have been the safest place they knew. As detectives secured the property, forensic teams spent hours examining every room. The quiet neighbourhood was suddenly filled with police vehicles, crime scene investigators, and shocked residents trying to understand what had happened just a few doors away. News spread rapidly across Bedfordshire. Parents hugged their children more tightly. Friends struggled to believe that an entire family had been killed inside their own home. But the biggest mystery was not only what had happened inside the house. It was who was missing. The husband and father, 45-year-old Ndodana Mkhanyisi Chuma, was nowhere to be found. Police quickly discovered something even more disturbing. According to travel records, he had already left the United Kingdom several days before the bodies were discovered. Investigators learned that he had travelled through Heathrow Airport and boarded an international flight to Zimbabwe. The timing immediately raised serious questions. Why had he left the country before anyone realised his wife and daughters were dead? Was his departure simply a coincidence? Or had he carefully planned his escape before anyone even knew a crime had been committed? Bedfordshire police rapidly identified him as the main suspect in the investigation and issued an international appeal for information. His photograph was released to the public. Authorities warned that anyone who saw him should not approach him, but instead contact police immediately. As investigators began reconstructing the family's final days, another picture slowly started to emerge. Behind what appeared to be an ordinary family life, there were signs that their relationship had been falling apart. Friends later revealed that the marriage had reportedly been under severe strain. Some claimed the couple had been discussing divorce. Others said they believed Nothabo wanted to begin a new chapter of her life. Exactly how those private struggles developed remains part of the ongoing investigation, but detectives now believe understanding the family's final weeks could be the key to explaining what happened inside that house. For investigators, every phone call, every text message, every financial transaction, and every CCTV recording became potential evidence. Each clue would help establish one critical timeline. When were the victims last seen alive? Who was with them? And what happened before the suspect boarded a flight out of Britain? Those questions would soon lead detectives into an investigation stretching thousands of miles beyond the United Kingdom. Because solving this case would no longer depend only on finding evidence. It would depend on finding the man who had vanished across international borders. As detectives secured the crime scene in Great Denham, another investigation was already unfolding hundreds of miles away. It was no longer just a homicide case. It had become an international manhunt. The first priority was to establish a precise timeline. Forensic specialists carefully examined the family home, documenting every room, collecting physical evidence, and determining how long the victims had been dead. Every detail mattered. The estimated time of death would later be compared with travel records, phone data, security camera footage, and witness statements. Police also began reviewing digital evidence, mobile phones, bank transactions, internet activity, vehicle movements, doorbell cameras, automatic number plate recognition systems. Investigators wanted to know exactly what happened during the family's final days, and whether anyone had seen or heard anything unusual. Neighbours described the Chuma family as quiet and largely private. Some recalled seeing members of the family only a few days before the tragedy. Others admitted they had noticed nothing out of the ordinary. There had been no obvious signs of violence, no loud arguments, and no emergency calls that anyone could remember. That absence of warning only deepened the mystery. If something had gone terribly wrong inside the home, it appeared to have happened behind closed doors. Police soon confirmed that the last confirmed movements of Ndodana Makanyisi Chuma were not in Bedfordshire, but at Heathrow Airport. Immigration records showed that he had left the United Kingdom on July 4th. By the time officers entered the family home days later, he was believed to have already arrived in Zimbabwe. The discovery dramatically changed the direction of the investigation. Detectives were no longer searching only for answers inside the house. They now had to coordinate with international law enforcement agencies while continuing to build a murder case at home. Bedfordshire Police worked with the National Crime Agency, border authorities and international partners to trace the suspect's movements after he left Britain. Every airport record was examined. Every passport scan was reviewed. Investigators wanted to determine whether Zimbabwe was his final destination or simply the first stop in a longer escape plan. At the same time, detectives began interviewing relatives, friends, co-workers, and anyone who had recently spoken with the family. What they learned suggested that the household had been experiencing serious difficulties long before the tragedy. Several people familiar with the family said the marriage had become increasingly strained. Some believed separation was becoming inevitable. According to reports, Nothabo had been planning to move forward with her life. Although police have not publicly confirmed every detail of those accounts, investigators carefully examined whether ongoing domestic tensions could have played a role in the events leading up to the deaths. Domestic homicide specialists know that family violence rarely begins without warning. In many cases, there are months or even years of emotional conflict, controlling behaviour, financial disputes, or relationship breakdown before violence escalates. Whether any of those warning signs existed in this family remains one of the central questions investigators are trying to answer. Meanwhile, officers appealed directly to the public. They released the suspect's photograph across television, newspapers, and social media. Anyone with information about his location was urged to contact police immediately. Authorities also warned that members of the public should not attempt to confront him themselves. As media coverage expanded, the case attracted international attention. People across both Britain and Zimbabwe began following every development. Questions quickly emerged about whether the suspect could be arrested overseas and whether he might eventually face trial in the United Kingdom. Legal experts explained that international murder investigations are often far more complicated than domestic cases. Even when investigators identify a suspect, bringing that person back to face justice may require lengthy legal proceedings involving multiple governments. For detectives, however, the immediate priority remained unchanged. Build the strongest possible case. Establish an undeniable timeline. Preserve every piece of forensic evidence. And ensure that if the suspect were located anywhere in the world, prosecutors would already have a solid foundation for criminal charges. But while investigators focused on evidence, another question continued to haunt everyone following the case. What had happened inside that house during the family's final hours? The answer to that question would become the heart of the investigation, and every new piece of evidence would bring detectives one step closer to reconstructing the family's final days. As the investigation entered its next stage, detectives turned their attention to understanding not only how the three victims died, but why. In many homicide investigations, the physical evidence tells investigators what happened. The personal history tells them why. Officers began reconstructing the lives of the Chuma family in the months leading up to the tragedy. They interviewed relatives, friends, co-workers, and neighbours, hoping someone had noticed changes that in hindsight might explain what had happened. People who knew the family described them as hard-working and devoted to their children. From the outside, there was little to suggest that anything was seriously wrong. Like many families, they kept their private lives largely out of public view. But as investigators dug deeper, they found reports that the marriage had been under increasing strain. Several people claimed the couple had been experiencing significant relationship difficulties. Some said divorce had been discussed. Others believed they had been living with growing emotional tension for some time. Police have not publicly confirmed the full nature of those personal issues, but investigators examined every aspect of the relationship to determine whether it played a role in the killings. For detectives, no detail was too small. They reviewed text messages exchanged between the couple. They analysed phone records. They examined financial transactions to determine whether there had been unusual spending, withdrawals, or transfers in the days before the deaths. They also searched computers and electronic devices for emails, internet searches, and digital conversations that might reveal the family's final plans. Every piece of information became another part of a timeline that investigators hoped would explain exactly what happened. At the same time, forensic experts continued their examination of the house. Specialists analysed fingerprints, DNA evidence, blood patterns, and other forensic traces that could establish the sequence of events inside the home. Unlike television crime dramas, these examinations often take days or even weeks. Every result must be scientifically verified before investigators can draw conclusions. Meanwhile, public attention focused increasingly on one unanswered question. Why had Ndodana Makanyisi Chuma left Britain when he did? Police confirmed that he had departed the country before officers entered the family home and discovered the victims. That timing immediately became one of the most important facts in the entire investigation. Detectives wanted to know when his travel had been arranged. Had the airline ticket been booked weeks in advance, or had it been purchased only after the deaths? Investigators also examined whether anyone had helped organise the journey or whether the suspect had acted alone. Every airport camera, passport checkpoint and travel record was carefully reviewed. The answers could reveal whether the departure was part of a carefully planned escape or something entirely different. Legal experts noted that leaving a country before a crime is discovered does not by itself establish guilt. However, investigators consider such movements highly significant when viewed alongside other evidence. That is why detectives continued building their case methodically, relying on forensic findings, witness statements, and verified records rather than assumptions. As news coverage spread internationally, the victims became more than names in a police statement. Friends remembered Nothabo as a caring mother who wanted the best for her daughters. Natalie was described as a teenager with dreams for the future. Little Nala had only just begun discovering the world around her. Their deaths left an enormous void that could never be filled. Community members gathered to leave flowers, handwritten notes, and children's toys near the family home. Many struggled to understand how such a tragedy could happen without anyone realising the danger beforehand. The case also renewed conversations across Britain about domestic violence and the warning signs that sometimes remain hidden until it is too late. Experts emphasised that family violence often develops behind closed doors, making it difficult for friends and neighbours to recognise the risks. While every case is different, investigators continue to examine whether earlier intervention might have changed the outcome. As the days passed, one reality became increasingly clear. Finding the suspect would not automatically solve every mystery. Detectives still needed to prove exactly what happened inside the house, present the evidence in court, and give the victims' families the answers they deserved. But before any trial could begin, one major obstacle remained. The man wanted in connection with the deaths was believed to be thousands of miles away, outside the reach of British police. With the suspect believed to be in Zimbabwe, the investigation entered its most challenging phase. Finding a suspect is one thing. Bringing that person back to face trial is another. Bedfordshire police continued working with national and international law enforcement agencies to locate Ndodana Makanyisi Chuma and determine his exact whereabouts. Information was shared across borders, and investigators remained in contact with authorities outside the United Kingdom. International homicide investigations often move far more slowly than domestic cases. Every country has its own legal system, its own criminal procedures, and its own rules regarding extradition. Before a suspect can be returned to another country, legal requirements must be met, evidence must be reviewed, and government authorities may need to approve the process. For that reason, detectives understood that patience would be essential. While efforts to locate the suspect continued, investigators in Britain focused on completing the strongest possible case. Forensic examinations continued. Digital evidence was reviewed again and again. Witnesses were re-interviewed as new information emerged. Every statement was carefully compared against physical evidence to ensure the timeline was accurate. This meticulous approach is critical in any murder investigation. A successful prosecution depends not on public opinion, but on evidence that can withstand scrutiny in court. Police also continued supporting the victims' relatives, who were grieving while waiting for answers. The deaths of Nothabo, Natalie and Nala devastated not only their family, but also the wider community. Residents of Great Denham held moments of reflection and left flowers near the family's home. Many said they could not imagine how such a tragedy could unfold in a neighbourhood known for its peace and safety. As the investigation remained in the headlines, the case sparked wider discussions about domestic homicide. Experts pointed out that many family murders occur after periods of escalating relationship conflict that may not be visible to outsiders. Friends and neighbours often remember only small changes in behaviour after the tragedy has already occurred. That does not mean warning signs never existed. It may simply mean they were hidden from public view. Investigators have not publicly disclosed every finding in this case, and many important details remain confidential while the investigation continues. As a result, several key questions remain unanswered. What exactly happened inside the house during the family's final hours? What evidence led police to focus on the husband as the primary suspect? What events occurred in the days before he left the United Kingdom? Those answers may eventually emerge if the case reaches court. Until then, investigators continue to rely on verified evidence rather than speculation. For the families of the victims, justice is about far more than an arrest. It is about understanding the truth. It is about ensuring that those responsible are held accountable through the legal system. And it is about honouring the lives of 3 people whose future was taken away far too soon. Cases like this remind us that behind every headline are real families, real communities, and lives forever changed. As this investigation continues, police are urging anyone with information about the whereabouts of Ndodana Makanyisi Chuma to contact the authorities immediately. Every new piece of information, no matter how small it may seem, could help move the investigation forward. The deaths of Nothabo, Natalie and Nala remain a heartbreaking reminder of how quickly an ordinary family can become the centre of an international murder investigation. Their story is still unfolding, and until every question is answered, investigators, loved ones, and an entire community continue to wait for justice.